Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for joining us today. Our speaker today, joining us all the way from East Sussex. Did I get
That's
that
right.
right, Damien? Exactly, in the UK. So Damien is a social media strategist, consultant, and writer with over 20 years experience in public relations and communications. He founded the Social C-Suite to help senior leaders get the most from social media and thrive in the social age. So Damien regularly speaks at leadership events, conferences on the subject of social leadership, and is also co-organized and presented at workshops for C-levels leaders. He also regularly interviews CEOs for his blog and his book, The Social CEO, was also published by Bloomsbury in 2019. So, um, Damien, if you can just take over from here, I'm sure this is going to be an amazing presentation. Looking through the slides. Okay.
Thank you,
Thank you
Bus.
very much.
Thank you for everyone for having me here. It's a pleasure to be talking to you all. I see the messages coming in from not just from Southern Africa, but from other parts of the world as well, which is really fantastic to see. So I hope that I can give you some insights and some food for thought today to go away with. And so I don't have I don't have access to the slides, so I'm going to ask Bus to move the slides forward for me. So as you said, I'm Damien Corbett. I run the Social C-Suite. I interview CEOs about their use of social media. That led me to writing the book called The Social CEO. But I didn't actually write the book. It was more of a collaboration. I got a lot of CEOs who I'd interviewed to contribute chapters. So the idea of the book really was more of a kind of a why to use social media rather than a how to. I wanted to show what other leaders were doing and how they were using it, and to inspire CEOs and senior managers, senior leaders, to inspire them to perhaps think about their own use of social media or not use of social media, as is often the case, and make them perhaps have second thoughts and think, okay, maybe I should actually be trying this. So Bus, if you wouldn't mind to move to the first slide, that would be great. Um, so I guess everyone's talking about the new normal in the post-COVID age, and I know each country has had different effects of COVID. But certainly here in the UK, a lot of people have been working from home for the last year. Shops are shut, a lot of things have closed down, and businesses are struggling. And for a lot of leaders, it's a very different scenario. So it's not just the COVID, but we've in many parts of the world there seems to be a sort of we've entered a kind of post-truth age as well. And of course, we're in the social media age, which we've been in for 10 years or more. So the kind of confluence of all of these things, the fact that there's social media, the fact that there's disinformation, the fact that people are having to work remotely, it's quite a challenge sometimes for leaders um, to lead in this kind of environment, and especially to lead their teams and to engage with their customers or their supporters. And that's where social media comes in, because I truly believe that in this day and age, leaders are expected to be present, visible, and accountable online. It's not really an option anymore, I don't believe. I think it's actually a necessity. And I think for those who are not doing it, it's they're actually letting themselves down. So, Vus, if you wouldn't mind to go to the next slide, please. And this one has got a quote. So, Sarah Goodall wrote the opening chapter for the Social CEO book. She runs an agency in the UK focusing on B2B customers, and what she said is, and bear in mind that this book came out in 2019. That was the hardback. The paperback has just come out, but the hardback came out before COVID. So bear in mind that a lot of what was said in the book was pre-COVID, and it's actually stood the test of time and has actually almost become more relevant. Which is sort of, I think that's quite telling. So Sarah says social media is at the heart of the technological changes that are driving today's modern, more collaborative style of leadership. It allows the modern leader to be found and to engage with their community wherever they are. So I think that's, it's important, that thing about being found and engaging. I think for many leaders still, the idea of engaging with anybody apart from their PA who's guarding their door and guarding their emails is a difficult concept. And I think we need to kind of get past that. So there's two, if we can go on to the next slide, there's a couple of really important pieces of research that came out this year. One of them is the Edelman Trust Barometer. Now, some of you might have come across that. It comes out every year in January, and it's done by the Edelman PR agency based in the US, but a massive global PR agency. And what they do is they poll people from all over the world on all sorts of aspects of trust, whether it's to do with governments, with the media, and also with business. And one of the interesting things well, I'll get onto that in a second. So there's the Edelman Trust Barometer, which I really recommend people look up. And there's another one that came out this year by Brunswick, the Brunswick Group, and they do the Connected Leadership Report. And both of these are really, really eye-opening in the sense of showing how important it is for leaders to actually be visible online these days, and actually especially on social media. And these are well-trusted, highly reputable reports. They're not something I've just pulled off a Google search. So it's worth checking them both out. If you Google both of those things, you'll find some information. So if we go on to the next slide, it just shows a couple of some of the key findings. So this is from the Edelman Trust Barometer. So this is one of the I think this is quite an important graphic, and it talks about how CEOs are expected to publicly speak out about societal issues. So whether it was to do with the pandemic or jobs or societal issues, local community issues, 86% of people, this was the public and also employees, 86% of them expected leaders to speak out about issues. So, if you think that hiding in your proverbial corner office and just running the company is enough these days, it's actually not. And I mean, obviously the situation is different depending on where you are. In America, perhaps it's a slightly different expectation. Perhaps it's different in the UK, it's different in Germany, it's different in Singapore, perhaps it's different in South Africa or Brazil, wherever you are in the world, it's going to be slightly different. But the fact is that there is a growing expectation for leaders to speak out about things. And there's a lot of issues to speak out about at the moment, whether it's to do with COVID, with just truth and trust generally in society. So if we can go on to the next slide, this is from the Brunswick report as well. So this is quite interesting. This is showing that with a 5-to-1 ratio, employees actually prefer to work for connected leaders. And that's quite interesting. And this is showing a global response. So if you look at India, 95%, there's a 48-to-1. 95% of employees expect to work for somebody would prefer to work for a connected leader. It's pretty high in Brazil, parts of Asia. I mean, even in Germany, where social media usage is perhaps not as common, even there, up to a third of the population, would prefer to work for a connected leader. So, and the global average is about 63%. So, I think those two slides that from the Edelman Trust Barometer and from Brunswick show that there is a desire for leaders to be connected and to be visible. So, how do we do that? This, I guess, is the point of this talk. So, after that little preamble, if we can go on to the next slide, please. So I've talked about the corner office, and of course, I don't know if any of you actually have a corner office. It's just, it's one of those things. It's the kind of, in your barricaded place where you've behind your desk and you've got a PA guarding the door. Perhaps you have someone checking your emails. It's about stepping away from that now. It's about stepping out of the corner office and perhaps stepping into the lobby, or walking up, going into the canteen. Being by the water cooler, all of these, expressions, but it's about getting out and actually mixing with, walking the shop floor, walking the factory floor, getting out, seeing your customers. That's what social leadership really is, and why it's important, because it's the word trust will come up a few times in this talk, and trust is one of the most important factors, I think, these days. To be seen as a leader who is trustworthy is so important, not just for employees, but for customers, or if you're running a charity, for your supporters, or if you're running some sort of non-profit. It's whatever you do, trust is important. And because leaders are expected to be more visible, they need to obviously be trustworthy individuals. They need to exude trust. So stepping out of this proverbial corner office on social media builds trust. It also makes you more accessible, which can be quite scary, to feel that you have to actually be accessible to people. But we'll come to that. I'll talk about that more in a minute, because it doesn't mean you're going to be spending your whole life on Twitter. It's more about the being seen as being accessible is important. Being transparent, the same thing. And two important factors of doing these things is it attracts the right kind of talent. I know if I was looking for a new job, and if I had options between who to work for, I would probably be more likely to work for an employer where the leader is a kind of figurehead and is visible on social and has important things to say. I'd probably rather work for that company than somebody who we don't even know who runs it. And and for the similar reasons, it's also great to engage with employees. If you are, I can give you some examples in a minute. If you can be somebody, a leader who can work with social and even engage internally a lot better, it's great for employee retention, and it makes people feel part of a family. It doesn't matter how many employees you have. You might have 10, you might have 10,000. If you are running an organization with 10,000 employees and you can actually somehow engage with them and make them feel valued and part of the family, that's a very powerful thing to do. And last but not least, should you want to develop your own personal brand, social media is the perfect way of doing that. And allied to that, obviously, the corporate brand, the organization that you lead. If you are branding yourself and you are being a great leader online, it reflects well on the organization as well. So if we can skip on to the next slide now. So you might be thinking, okay, this all sounds really good, but how do we do it? And obviously bearing in mind that there's probably a couple of hundred people listening to this, and you'll be at different levels. Some of you might be well experienced at social media, and what I'm telling you might be pretty obvious and you might be doing it already. Some of you might not have started. But I think just going back and looking at some of the basic reasons for doing it are important, because it's very easy to think, okay, let's jump on the social media bandwagon because everyone else is doing it. And that isn't really a good enough reason. I'm just having a quick sip of coffee. That's not a good enough reason in my book. It has to be a strategic process, like anything else. So, it might seem obvious, but you need to define your goals. What do you want to achieve on social media? What is it about? Is it about, as we've said in the previous slide, is it about building your personal brand? Is it about attracting talent? Is it about developing authenticity and trustworthiness in you as the leader, and therefore in your organization? It probably needs to be a mixture of all of those things, really. But before you even do that, you need to understand your community. If you are running maybe a manufacturing company making machine tools, perhaps for business to business buyers, your community will be very different from somebody who's perhaps running a media organization, or who's running a charity, who's trying to engage more with the public. So you need to think about who your community is, and then what platforms are more appropriate. And that takes me on to point 3 about choosing your platform. So in the former example, if you are some sort of manufacturer and you're dealing with other business people, LinkedIn is the obvious place to go to start with. But I wouldn't overlook platforms like Twitter either, because Twitter is quite a useful tool. A lot of people use Twitter for research. And if you are on there and you are visible and sharing useful information, it can be a valuable additional tool to LinkedIn. You need to share content, obviously, that might seem obvious, but the vast majority of leaders who are on LinkedIn, let's just look at LinkedIn, a lot of them, they just have a LinkedIn account and that's it. They don't actually use it in any way. They've set it up, they've got their data on there, what their experiences. They might follow a few groups, they might follow a few topics, and that's it. They never interact. LinkedIn is fantastic. I mean, I use LinkedIn a lot, and it's fantastic for sharing content. So, you know, imagine if once a week you shared, even if it was just a press release that your company had sent out, or even just a link to some news about your industry. It might not even be your own content. It might be something to do with the industry that you work in. You could share a link to some interesting new developments, put your own spin on it, write a couple of sentences just to say, oh, there's some interesting new research here that I've come across. You know, it might be of interest to my community. Boom, you share that, add a few relevant hashtags, and you'll suddenly find that people will be coming to your account and start following you and liking your posts. And before long, you can actually become, I don't like the term thought leader, but it's very easy to do this and to become somebody who people will turn to and actually go and check out your account to see what you have to say about your industry. There you go. You know, it's very easy. It doesn't take a lot of work. And suddenly you are actually somebody who is a thought leader in your industry. So think about that for a second. But the most important thing is obviously to be authentic. You need to be your true self and use your own tone of voice if you can. We will come on to some other ways of doing this because some people are not great with words. They feel uncomfortable, and you can always get people to help you. You know, if you have a team, if you have marketing people around you, or PR people, or kids who are good at this stuff, you know, it's always good to get help. So let's skip on to the next slide. So risk. Everyone's worried about risk on social media for very good reason, because it's very easy to say something wrong and you know, things can go badly wrong then. But I would say, I think it's important to realize that I think the biggest risk is not engaging on social media in 2021 rather than engaging. I think if you're not on there, the conversation is happening anyway. There are conversations happening about your industry, perhaps around about your own business that you are not even aware of. So if you're not on there listening, you are missing out and potentially unable to put your side of the story across. So like anything else, you need to be strategic in your approach. Treat it like any other business activity. You know, you've got your all of your other business sort of the different activities that you have to do, that you have to follow, the different tasks, the different rules. Social media is no different. In fact, you have to be more careful perhaps on social media because of its nature. Once something is said, it's said. You know, even if you delete a tweet, people can take screen grabs. So you have to be very strategic, know what you're doing. Going back to the previous slide, you know, think about what you actually want to achieve, who your community is. And of course, you know, be aligned with your organization's strategy and goals. It needs to be part of the wider strategy of what your organization is doing. That doesn't mean that you can't come across as a really personal, authentic individual, but it's also, it's aligned with what you're trying to achieve for your organization. The two work together. And if you are lucky enough to have any comms people working with you, or somebody who's familiar with writing content, or who's familiar with social media, let them give you content ideas. I know a lot of CEOs who are obviously very busy running big organizations. They don't necessarily have time to be trying to find relevant content to share. But if you can get people in your team saying, oh, you know, here's an article about X, Y, and Z, this might be worth sharing, or it might be something that they've written themselves. It might be a press release. It might be some new product material, product information. It could be anything. You know, get your team to give you content ideas, and then that'll help you. Then you can choose what you want to share. Having a support network is important as well. So, you know, make sure you try and work with your team or find external help. Perhaps somebody, a social media expert. I'm not recommending myself. I'm just saying there's plenty of people out there who can help with these kind of things and just give you a bit of guidance and help you along the way. And something else to consider is even to think about reverse mentoring, which if you think about, oh yeah, there's somebody here Bongani Plonga has to leave because he's got a poor network. Sorry about that. I hope you are. I hope you were able to catch some of that anyway. Yes, but it's important to consider reverse mentoring. There might be people in your team, young people who are very familiar with social media. So again, I know CEOs who have gone and found people in their organization who've actually helped them and taught them how to use social media. So, don't be too proud to say, look, I don't know how this stuff works. I'm a bit worried about it. Is there somebody who can help me? I think people will appreciate that the fact that you are reaching out for help and that you're showing that you're not perfect, but that you want to improve. That shows a little bit of humility. And again, that's maybe a nice leadership trait to display. So how are we doing for time? I think I'm running quite fast ahead, so I need to maybe speak a bit slower. But what we will do is we'll just go on to the final slide now, which again is a nice quote from Sarah Walker Smith. Is interesting. I interviewed her for my blog a few years ago. I met her at a round table that I was taking part in. And she's interesting because she runs quite a big law firm in the UK called Shakespeare Martineau. And she is the only non-lawyer running a law firm. She's a trained accountant, but she runs a law firm. And she's also one of the very few female CEOs of law firms in the UK. So, Sarah, she's not one of these people who was born with a silver spoon in her mouth, as we say in the UK. She came from very humble beginnings. She had not a very rich upbringing in any way at all. She grew up on a council estate, but she's a wonderful leader because she's got such a rich mixture of experience and an interesting background. And again, what she said here in the interview that I did with her was before COVID. Authenticity, building trust, and the need to be able to connect to an increasingly wide range of people and differing mindsets is becoming the heart of the CEO role. This is in part because of social media, but also because of the need for greater direction and hope in an increasingly fast-paced and volatile world. And if you think how fast-paced and volatile things have become post-COVID, it's quite, that was quite, again, quite prescient what she wrote there. She could almost see the writing on the wall. But the thing is, a lot of what like Sarah, who I quoted at the beginning of this talk, and the other Sarah here, what they said was relevant because social media has been important for CEOs for a long time. And I'm not just talking about CEOs, I'm talking about for anybody in a leadership position, any kind of director. It's always been important since its beginning. And I think a lot of leaders didn't really get it. I mean, I've been talking about this since 2014, so we're looking at 7 years now I've been talking about this. And when I first started talking about leadership was social media for leaders, it seemed people were saying, what, that's just not relevant at all. And now everybody's talking about it. So I'm glad I'm glad I stayed the course, and hopefully what I'm saying now is more relevant to people. So that is, I do believe, the final slide of my talk. So I know I was asked to talk for half an hour, so it's slightly less. We're looking at about 25 past now, but hopefully that'll give us more time for a few questions. And if anybody wants to go back over any of the slides and wants to take screen grabs or anything like that, I'm sure we can do that. So yeah, so I'm happy to take some questions now.
Hey, Damien. I'll just start with the first one from Neo. Social media streets are brutal. How do you avoid crossing the proverbial line and getting yourself into so much trouble?
Yes, this is part of the risk question. It can seem very brutal. And I think this is why we need to, like I said, be very strategic in your approach to social media. If you're not sure, get some training, find somebody internally who can help you, go outside if you need to, get some training, perhaps before you start. But always bear in mind that what you're saying is visible to anybody. That's the beauty of social media. That's its power, but that's also its danger. So you need to be responsible as a leader. Don't shoot from the hip. Don't speak without thinking. Never post anything when you've had a few drinks. never get into an argument on social media. It's so easy. It's funny I should say that, but there was a CEO in America called John Legere, Legere, and he was the CEO of T-Mobile America. And he actually made a point of getting into arguments on Twitter. That was his strategy. And he actually used to, before Trump was president, he would have arguments with Donald Trump on Twitter, and they would troll each other. I mean, it was ridiculous. It was very entertaining, but it was all part of his strategy because T-Mobile was a kind of upstart brand in America. So John's approach was to be very brash, and he has got about over 4 million followers now on Twitter. It's ridiculous. He's no longer the CEO. Somebody else has taken over. He's still involved in the organization, but you know, his approach was very unusual. So I wouldn't recommend that. You know, people like Elon Musk as well. You know, they can do and almost say what they want because it's their, you know, they've got so much control over the organization. But so I think if you're in any doubt, if somebody is perhaps being confrontational to you on social media, just respond politely and say, look, I understand what you're saying. I take on board what you have to say. Why don't you email whatever the customer service, or just take it offline if you can, lead them offline, show to whoever's watching that you understand that there's an issue and that you sympathize with them. You've taken it offline. People can see that you've dealt with the issue, that you haven't ignored them, but you haven't got into an awkward situation of saying something that you might regret. It's taken offline, and then it can be dealt with there. So that would be my best advice in a situation like that.
Okay, thanks, Damien. I think we have Paco on the line. Paco, I'm just going to allow you to talk. Then you can ask a question live.
Good morning. Thank you very much. That is insightful. And
You're welcome.
I agree with you on two things. You have to set your own goals, and then you have to be authentic. Because like you are saying, someone will just say, I am taking this way and I'll maintain it. Now, if you are not authentic, then you are bound to shake on the way. When, like the guy who took the argumentative line, you know, he maintained it, and there you go, he got 4 million followers. So it's better. I agree with you that you have to know what you want to get out of it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes, that's part of the strategy. You need to know what you want to achieve. If you want to be notorious and have notoriety on social media, then fine, you know, go for it. But just be prepared for, you know, for a firestorm perhaps. But some people enjoy that, and it depends on the organization. But if you have shareholders that you're responsible for, you have employees that you're responsible for, think about them, you know, think about them before you say something that you might regret. But it's very true. Yes. I mean, follow your route, be authentic. You need to be yourself. But that doesn't mean that you need to be brash or careless. You can do both.
Okay, thanks a lot for that, Paco. We also have Ignatius on the line. Ignatius, you're free to talk, please.
Ignatius, you're on mute.
There you go.
Ignatius is still muted.
Right. While Ignatius is figuring that out, we will go to Angeline. Angeline.
Good morning. Good morning, Damien. Thank you for a very insightful talk. The thing I struggle with is, what is the frequency of posting? Let's use Twitter, LinkedIn, any of those. And how often do you need to engage?
That's a good question. I think it depends on the platform. I would say on something like LinkedIn, which is probably the one that most of you will be comfortable with and most of you would be using, I would probably recommend, if you've never posted before, try and aim for something weekly, perhaps, to start with, just to get the ball rolling. But I would definitely not recommend more than once a day on LinkedIn, because of the nature of it. It's sort of, it's a bit longer form. It stays in people's, it's slightly different from Twitter, for example. LinkedIn, I would say daily or every other day, perhaps, would probably be a sensible one to go for. Whereas something like Twitter, depending on how many followers you have, you know, you could probably tweet every hour and you're not going to be spamming people because different people will be seeing it all the time. I'm not recommending that you do that, but, you know, Twitter, you could also do, you could do daily, you could do a couple of times a day. But, you know, if you're not using social media much, you know, with any of these platforms, rather, you know, do less to start with than too much, and then just gauge, see how the feedback is. So LinkedIn, perhaps once a week. Twitter, if you're not used to it, even there once a week, just tweet something out, try different times of day, and then just see how the response is, and kind of take it from there. And don't forget that it's quite useful to use hashtags, especially on Twitter. So if you're tweeting about a particular industry, you know, try and find, you know, you can even look online to see what other hashtags people are using, and then just use a couple of those. People will help. It'll help people find what you're sharing. So I hope that helps, Angeline.
No, perfect. Thank you.
A pleasure.
All right. Thank you for that, Angeline. We also have an interesting question here from Pami, our CEO. So it seems sometimes people can say anything, whether true, reasonable, valid, or not, on social media with no consequences. This can impact the organization and its leader. Do you have some tips on how we can deal with this? And what point should we consider taking legal action?
Yes, I mean, I think that the fact that people can say anything is as I've mentioned, it's a danger, and I think you need to be, you know, you should never just say what you know what you think without thinking, if that makes sense. You know, it needs to be, as I've said, it needs to be part of a wider strategy, part of the organizational strategy. So you have to be very careful in how you say things sometimes, and you know, you have to be sensible on social media. And the fact that it is, once something is said, it's said. You can't take it back. You have to be very careful in how you approach things. That's not to say that you can't be authentic and you can't be a real human being and do all that, but you need to be careful and start carefully, start slowly, always start slowly. And if you're not sure about what you want to say, if you think what you're saying is, if you're in any doubt, don't share it. Check with somebody first. Check with your legal team, perhaps, if it is something controversial. And obviously, if it's to do with, you know, complex information you might be sharing, you often need to make sure that this is all run through the proper channels before you share anything, you know, that might be sensitive information or something like that. As for legal, you know, legal routes and things like that, if I understand the question correctly, is that if somebody says something bad about you, is that what the question was aimed at, or if you say something and then somebody takes legal action against you?
Yeah.
Can you clarify what the?
So basically, it says people can just say anything on social media,
yeah,
whether it's true, reasonable, valid, or not,
yeah,
right? Without any consequences. So, and this can impact.
There are consequences. That's the thing. There are consequences.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Sorry, I'll let you finish the question again.
So basically, the asker was asking, do you have any tips on how to deal with this, and what point should the company and the leader take legal action?
I think it depends. If something is being said that's actually slanderous or is damaging the brand, perhaps it might have to look at taking legal action against somebody if they are saying something. I mean, I'm not a legal expert, so I wouldn't want to make hard and fast recommendations. But I think the thing is always on social is to try and diffuse the situation before it gets to that, and try and, if somebody is being really difficult, you can just block them. Literally, you can just block them, and then they might still be saying things, but you're not listening and you're not partaking in the conversation. But I think if somebody is harassing you and is being slanderous about the organization, then I think you might need to then look at even reporting them to the platform itself as a starting point to get them removed. That might be the way to go to start with.
Okay, thanks for that, Damien. Another one of the questions we have here, an interesting one. So from Annabelle, how does a CEO balance the expected sector lead role and board expectations? In essence, how does one know when is the right time to say something and not need board approval, or say something that will rile the board?
Well, if we're talking about the CEO specifically, then obviously they are the CEO, so they are in a position as far as we know, they are leading the organization. So I think they need to treat it like anything else. Would they say something in a press conference that they think, oh, this is going to rile the board, I shouldn't say that? Would they say something at a party or something? It's the same situation. Would it be appropriate in another sense? Forget you're on social media. Imagine you're in a different situation. You might be at a conference. You might be on a Zoom call. Would it be appropriate to say it then? If not, if you're in any doubt, then don't. I think that's the only way to, and if it's something that perhaps the CEO feels strongly about and wants to share, but they're not sure, I think they need to talk to the board and just, ask for their feedback. The thing is, social media is quite spontaneous. So you need to have that spontaneity. If you're checking everything, going and checking everything, it loses that sense of spontaneity. So it's finding a balance, really. But I think if it's something that is sensitive or that's a difficult topic, something that the board might not be happy about, you need to, check with them. But on the other side, social media is also perhaps sometimes is not the place to be sharing the more sensitive or the more controversial things about the company. It might be a place where it's lighter stuff, perhaps less controversial stuff that you might be sharing, content about the organization, some PR, some personal stuff about yourself, to how you want to portray yourself. Perhaps that's a better approach anyway, rather than to see it as the place to be sharing potentially difficult content. Maybe that's not the place to do it. Certainly not when you're starting out. So I hope that makes sense.
Definitely. So Christian is asking, why do you think world leaders like presidents are so reluctant to use social media, although Trump was the exception?
It's interesting. I think it depends on, like you say, some leaders are very good at it, but I think most of them. I know that the president of Rwanda is very active on Twitter, and he uses it in a very powerful way. Personal branding, as well as getting the message out to the wider world about his vision for Rwanda. Whether you agree with him or not, he's quite effective at that. Trump was, well, Donald Trump is Donald Trump. He's a unique case. I think most leaders these days should be using it. Most governmental leaders, a lot of them that I think there's not that many who don't actually these days, if you think about it. But it's never them. I think Trump is unusual because he will do things at like 2 o'clock in the morning that send shivers down the spine of his advisors, but most leaders, I think what they're doing is what they're sharing is it's coming from their advisors. It's all part of the. That's my cat is trying to get out. I think someone might come and take it away. Sammy, not sure. Ziggy's trying to get out. sorry. That's the joy of Zoom calls from home. We have the reality of cats and things. Yeah, I think most of them are probably on there, and they are probably using it in a you know, as part of the wider kind of communications tool. So I think it's unusual for them not to be these days. There are obviously some who aren't, but yeah.
All right. So Ignatius is asking how you would deal with trolls, especially if there's a hidden agenda, such as the Bell Pottinger tweets, where your organization can be harmed irreparably based on bent truths.
Yes. Again, this is the dark side of social media, where bad things can happen and people can say things that are untrue. Trolling is a difficult one, and I have spoken to a few CEOs who have had this problem, and it's not pleasant to be trolled. And the only advice I can really say is to, if somebody is saying untruths about you or is harassing you, you need to report it straight away to the platform. You need to perhaps just send one response and say, you know, something like, you know, we don't agree with what you're saying, or something like that, and you know, we do not want to engage in this because it's you know, it's not true. Ask these people to take it offline. If they refuse to take it offline and they continue trolling you, you know, you just have to block them. But sometimes these people can pop up again. You know, this does happen, and I don't want to scare CEOs and leaders, because it's very unusual actually for this to happen. It's very, very unusual. Often it's somebody who might be a disgruntled ex-employee, somebody like that, who uses social media as a way to kind of get back and get their revenge. And unfortunately, this is just something that happens. You know, you have to just take it on the chin sometimes, but you just, you know, these people, you can just keep blocking them and reporting them. And I think sometimes that's the only way that you have to do it, and just try and ignore them as much as possible, and just don't let it get to you. I know it's not very helpful advice perhaps, because it can be quite personal, some of these attacks. There's actually there's a CEO of a charity in the UK. I don't have the link to the article, but if you Google it, her name is Polly Neate, Polly, surname is Neate, and she runs a charity called Shelter, which is for homeless people. And Polly was trolled about a year ago, I think, and she wrote an article about how, especially as a female CEO, she was getting some abuse online. And it's a really useful article. So if you just Google Polly Neate trolling, you'll be able to find the article, and that's quite useful because she gives some advice from a female perspective as well, because females are often, you know, sometimes because of the misogyny in society sometimes that still exists, they are often a target. So it's a very useful article. She offers some helpful advice about how to deal with it as well. But she's still on there. She's still on social media, still plowing away. She's not, you know, she's not given up. So it might be worth checking out that article as well.
Excellent. So another question from Tinzashe. How forgiving are the public for mistakes made when commenting on social and societal issues? So my fear is that cancel culture does not permit conversations with offering points of views, rather a keenness to be outraged, which may make C-suite executives reluctant to engage. I may further add that here is the CEO, perhaps has made a mistake online, and obviously they are associated with the brand, you know. So at times, how do you go back and win the public's hearts? Or
yes, I mean, the whole cancel culture thing is a tricky one, because there are things that perhaps were, you know, 5 years ago you might have said something and nobody would have batted an eyelid, but now these days it's unacceptable. And if somebody comes across something that you said, so it might not even be something that you say now on social media. It might be something that you said 5 years ago, and it's popped up, and then somebody shares it as a way to attack you. I mean, I think, you know, we're all human. We all make mistakes, and the public is generally quite forgiving. I think if they see, and this is why the authenticity thing is so important. They need to see that you are who you say you are. You know, you might be quite combative online. You might be somebody who is quite opinionated, but as long as you are true to yourself and you're not breaking any rules and you're not being unkind to people, if you are, and you're not, you know, you're not being racist, you're not being homophobic, you're not being misogynistic online, you know, you need to, you know, if you are being fair and you're being honest and you're not doing any of these bad things, I think sometimes, you know, people can see, okay, this person is honest, they made a mistake. You know, I mean, I have a 14-year-old daughter, and she watches all these YouTubers and these gamers, you know, and they all like, they're heroes to her, you know, and then something comes out about something that one of them said 5 years ago or did 3 years ago, and suddenly, you know, everybody's on them, you know, everybody's attacking these 20-year-olds because they said something stupid when they were 16, you know, and these things tend to blow over, I think, unless you do something really bad, in which case, well, you should hang your head in shame, and you should, you know, you should perhaps disappear off social media. I think for most people, if what you say, if it's a simple slip of the tongue and it's just taken in the wrong context, apologize, you know, try and take it offline, maybe lay low for a bit, if, you know, is perhaps sometimes the best thing to do. Just don't disappear, but just kind of go quiet, be apologetic, be sorry, and you know, people will kind of move on to the next crisis, and there'll be somebody else that they want to have a go at. But yeah, it's not always easy, and I think you just have to be, as long as you are authentic from the beginning, and and you are, people know what you stand for. If you do say something wrong, most people will think, okay, that's just a mistake, and that's just a slip of the tongue, and they're actually all right people. So that's why you should start as you mean to go on, with you know, be very authentic and be very truthful at the beginning, and don't. Anyway, I could ramble on for ages, but I hope that answers the question.
It definitely does. So we have Charles Vashoma on the line. Charles.
Hi, Charles.
Hey, Damien. Thanks so much for your presentation.
It's a pleasure.
So yeah, I have one comment and a question. So the quick comment is, what came to mind when someone asked a question about suing people that might say things that are not true about your company? What came to mind for me is that probably just reinforces your point about how important it is to get, you know, your story out there, the correct story, so that the consumers of the information can, you know, quickly weigh up and say, this is unlikely to be true, because they know your brand, they know your story, versus, you know, going through litigation and this sort of thing. So yeah,
well,
that
exactly,
was just
Charles, because to just before you move on, that's the thing, that if you have a presence and you have followers who like you, it's often the case that your followers will come to your defense. You know,
right.
This can happen, and actually the person who's trolling you actually ends up being shouted down by your supporters and your followers. So, you know, it can be a really good thing that you have a presence, because if people like you and know you, then, you know, you've actually got other advocates who are supporting you, and the people will probably then disappear, you know, before it goes to litigation, as you were saying. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. So my question is, if you want to share links and make comments and views, you can obviously do that through the storyline, or the sort of, you know, where you can make your posts. But if you want to actually put out, let's say, articles, what is the best platform to use? And part of the question is, I remember it's a few years back, I think I read an article that suggested, if you write articles using the facility on LinkedIn, they own the article, or something to that effect. I'm not sure, but the question is, what is the best platform where, if you don't have your own website, for example, but you want post a full article with your views and questions around certain trends or Mm.
I mean, I do like to use LinkedIn. I don't really worry about whether LinkedIn owns it or not, because I share my articles all over the place, and I don't think LinkedIn is particularly litigious about that. If I share an article there and then I share it on another platform, but I would always say LinkedIn's a good place because LinkedIn has the option. You can share something as a post, but you can also share something as an article, and then and then you can get followers as an article writer on LinkedIn, which is, they can be different from your connections. So it's always useful to do that, though LinkedIn is making it's harder and harder to get many views, but it's still worth doing. Another platform that's quite useful is a platform called Medium. I don't know if any of you have come across it. It was founded, I think, by one of the founders of Twitter, and it's been around for 7 or 8 years now. And Medium it's a kind of place where you can share articles as well, and it's a kind of social network in its own way because you get followers. But then what you can do is you can share something on Medium, and then that article you can link to that on LinkedIn. So you can share a post on LinkedIn linking to your Medium article. So you're kind of getting 2 bangs for the buck then, because all of your LinkedIn followers will see it, and perhaps will go to your Medium site and then follow you there as well. And Medium's quite good because it is a publishing platform, so it's specifically for articles. And there's even a way that I think you can even get paid for sharing articles on Medium. But you can also set up your own blog. I mean, I have my own blog, which you can set up quite easily, and you can link to that. But I still find LinkedIn as the main one that I use as the way, wherever the content's being created, I still share it through LinkedIn. And I found that that's still the best way, or Twitter as well. But on Twitter, for example, you can link to a LinkedIn article, or you can link to an article on a blog or anywhere. But
super. Thank
to kind of answer your question, I still think LinkedIn is the main place. It's where most of your potential community might be, probably. So it's probably makes most sense to share things there.
Great. Thank you so much.
No problem, Charles.
Thanks, Charles. So Nano is asking where you draw the line between your personal and professional social media accounts, bearing in mind that your negative social media posts can come back to haunt you.
Yes. Well, don't do negative social media posts for a start. I think it's good sometimes for a CEO or a leader to share a bit of both. And there's a CEO in the States who I like to quote. He is going to be stepping down soon, but he's a fantastic role model, and he's a guy called Jack Salzwedel. So Jack, and then his surname is Salzwedel, Salzwedel. And if you look for him on Twitter, he runs an organization called American Family Insurance. There's a massive insurance company in the States with tens of thousands of customers. His Twitter account is AmFam, because the American Family Insurance is AmFam, and he's AmFam Jack. And if you look him up on Twitter, he's fantastic, because what he does, and bear in mind that he works with his comms team to make sure that the content is relevant, but he will share news about the organization, but he'll also share, he might go to a football game or a baseball game, and he'll share a picture at the game, or he might be doing a barbecue or a braai in the weekend, and he might share a picture. Not everyone is comfortable doing that. I'm not recommending that everyone does that, but he gets a good balance. If you have a look at his output on Twitter, you'll see how to kind of perhaps get the balance between the professional and the personal. And he doesn't do anything controversial on any of his social media platforms, because it is part of his brand as the CEO. And Jack likes to call himself the Chief Communications Officer or the Chief Cheerleading Officer of American Family. So he sees himself very much as part of the brand. So that's why his comms team work very carefully to position him in the right way. They feed him content ideas that are appropriate, but he will also do his own thing as well. He will share his own thing as well if he feels like it. For example, he follows Tottenham Hotspur Football Club in the UK, You know, he's an American, he's an old white guy running an insurance company in America, you know, and you wouldn't think that's particularly inspirational, but you know, he's an interesting guy. He shares football stories, he shares sports stories, he shares information, he champions his employees if they do some great work. He'll champion them on, you know, he'll mention them on Twitter, and it's great, you know. So he does. It's a really good balance, and he's not somebody who you might obviously think of as a good example of a social media expert. But Jack is definitely worth checking out for getting that balance right.
Thanks for that. So, how important is a social media policy in an organization, and what should be covered therein?
I think it's good to have one. I think not just for the CEO or senior managers, but for anybody in the organization who's using social for the organization. I think a basic social, you can find templates online. You know, there's lots of templates that you can find. Having a basic policy in place, I think, is essential, just to make sure that you all know the ground rules, and you all know what you can and can't do as a basis to move from. And you know, for example, you cannot share, you know, certain financial information, for example, or you cannot talk about this or that. So people just know. You know, it depends on the industry. Some industries are perhaps more sensitive than others as well. So I think that's just a sensible thing to do, to have a policy in place. And it will vary depending on the industry, but you know, it's definitely something that I think you need to have. It shouldn't be too restrictive, I wouldn't say, again, depending on the industry, but I think it's good to have something in place just for the basic ground rules, even if for a small organization, just a few basic ground rules to follow. So you know when not to overstep.
Mm-hmm. So Neo says, is your advice to do it yourself or get a PR expert? And if you do get external help, at what point do the views expressed stop being yours and become those of others, or simply just being spun by the PR experts?
Yeah, well, I'm very much of the school that it should be you. It should be your own thoughts. It should be your own ideas. That's, you know, all the CEOs who contributed to the book, they all do their own social media. They might get help. They might even get people to post for them, but the ideas of what they're sharing are theirs. So sometimes it's a fine line. I know some of them who do everything themselves. They don't get any advice. They just do it themselves. Whereas others who are perhaps running much bigger organizations and don't always have the time, they will work with the PR people or a comms agency, but they will always be the one who signs it off. So the tone of voice, for example, what's said. So I think otherwise, if you just relinquish control completely, it's not you, you know, and that goes against the whole authenticity trust thing. You know, it's fine to use an agency, but as long as it's your thoughts and your ideas that are actually the end result, even if somebody's helping you to write it, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it still needs to be coming from your own, you know, from inside here, and it needs to be you at the end of the day. Otherwise, I think it's self-defeating, and people can often see through it, and they can see it's not authentic, and then actually it starts to work against you.
So adding further to that, so there's a CEO who's never liked social media, and Damien comes and is like, you are very irrelevant if you do not use social media. So is there a guide for dummies? Where do you start?
Yeah, I mean, perhaps it's not fair to say that you're totally irrelevant if you don't use social media, but it might seem harsh to say that, but in many ways it is true. And I think we just have to accept that. You know, like I said at the very beginning, we're living in this social age where there is an expectation for leaders. If you remember those slides I showed at the very beginning, where 86% of people expect leaders to be speaking out. You know, in India, 95% of people want to work for a leader who's on social media. You know, these are big numbers. So where do you start? Again, I think, you know, it's about just going back to first of all thinking about, you know, what do you actually want to do? You know, what do you want to achieve on social media? And again, that goes back to understanding your community, understanding your strategy of your organization. So, you know, treat it as another spoke in the wheel of your organization's output. You know, you'll have your comms thing, you'll have your, you know, you have all the, you know, so social media is just another part of that. So think of it as another aspect of how you talk about your organization. There's always plenty to say. Once you dig deep and you ask around, you'll actually have too much to say. I don't think that's a problem. It's just making sure that it's aligned with your strategy, and that it's the story that you're telling on social media is part of the wider story of your organization and you as a leader. You know, that's why, you know, there's plenty of books out there to give you some advice about how to get started and the actual practicalities of, you know, how do you set up an account? I mean, you know, I'm not here to show you how to set up a Twitter account. There's lots of information about there, but it's more about how you think, how you approach it. And I think that's the important thing. And just be strategic and treat it like any other business tool. You know, and then you can't really go wrong.
Okay, perfect.
That helps.
Yeah, definitely. I think we'll do just one last question,
okay.
And we'll call it today.
Okay.
The rest of the questions we'll just send to you, and then you can just email the replies back to us.
Sure.
Then we'll send them first.
Okay.
Okay. So how do you track your social media impact or presence? Do you have any favorite tools that you specifically like to use? And if you do, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I don't actually use any tools. I just go by instinct, really, and I gauge the response. But I mean, every platform has got its own tools. So if you go into LinkedIn, there's lots of analytics tools. You don't need to pay necessarily for third-party tools. Twitter, LinkedIn, they all have tools that you can see what kind of response you're getting for your posts. And it's useful to use them. I wouldn't necessarily want to pay for these things, but it's useful to see perhaps what resonates and what doesn't. You can see by the likes you get, if nothing else, but you know, you can also see maybe by how many shares something gets. I mean, I normally all I do is when I post something on LinkedIn, I can look and see, oh, that got 20 likes or that got, you know, 20 comments. I can gather from just looking at that how effective it's been. I'm not a big stickler for analytics and all of that. I know that it is important and it plays a part. There's lots of analytics tools out there. But I would just say, to answer the question, use the platform's analytics, the free ones to start with, and you can quickly see it'll give you an idea about how effective each post is and give you an overview as well. But I don't even bother looking at those, to be honest. It's probably not great advice. It's probably not the most professional advice, but I tend to be quite organic in the way I work, and that seems to work for me. And I think you can gauge by the feedback, by the way people respond, if something's working or not, without having to look at data.
Awesome. I think then that's it. Thank you so much for your invaluable time today, Damien.
No problem.
Just really quite a revealing session today. And all to our viewers at home, thank you for joining us. We'll be seeing you again next week on Wednesday. Have a good morning further.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for inviting me on, and I really enjoyed it. And if anybody have any more questions, like you say, they can email them. And you can find me on LinkedIn there. If you look for Damien Corbet, Damien with an A, Corbet with one T, I'm all over social media. So you'll find me on most platforms, and feel free to contact me. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to help.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your questions, and thank you for giving me a platform to share my thoughts. I hope you all found it useful.
Cheers, Damien.
Thank you. Take care.